a lot of the common themes that I've heard on your podcast is it was, okay, a problem to be solved. People, addressed, I listened to the interview there with Surf, like he had a problem to be solved. And BandLab, there's that's transforming the way in which people think about creating music and so on, but it's still at the heart of it, it's like being driven by creativity.
The guest on this episode has what I call a longevity mindset. He has built 2 successful companies, one being the Disco, a world-renowned product in the music industry. And as he says on this podcast, they're soon getting to the starting line. What an interesting way of talking. Karl, we've been talking for a few minutes, and welcome to Sound Connections podcast, by the way. But I think what's going to be really interesting about this episode is we've been writing a big back and forth, and this podcast for me has become quite special because it's a place of, quoting yourself, vulnerability within music and business. And I hope that's what we're going to expect of today. But thank you, Karl, and welcome. Just to set the scene, I'll just ask you to do a small introduction of yourself as well. But you are the founder of Disco and Level 2 Music. You are, according to everything I can read, the largest music supervisor in Australia. And then Disco is, well, everyone knows Disco. But just to make a small introduction of yourself, to make some sort of formal intro, Karl, who are you?
Yeah, well, I'll keep it to the super short one, and then you can work out how much of the story you want to hear from behind that. But yeah, I'm the founder of Disco. Disco is a platform that's used for managing and sharing music files, and has grown over time to be the industry standard, I guess, particularly in the world of sync, and now beyond that. Disco was born out of Level 2 Music, which is the largest music supervision company in Australia that has been going for 22 years or so. And then prior to that, I worked in A&R, so worked at a company called Mushroom Records here in Australia, and also set up Zomba Australia, helped set up Zomba Australia before it was sold to BMG. So that's part of the story, I guess.
Something struck me about creativity that hasn't been spoken on like the right way, like the flow. And even though BandLab is still the product, there's something about never mind. It's interesting. It's really interesting.
I think creativity can sit at the heart, and really should sit at the heart, of most businesses that are at the intersection of tech and music. So you've got a background in publishing, you've got a background in production and songwriting and so on. So where does that then sort of like translate itself into business? And I think that, there's this really uncomfortable relationship between venture capital and investors and the music industry. They either don't understand the music industry, and then people from outside the music industry, they're saying what should be changed or should be different. But you kind of need to live inside the music industry, and you need to be, I think sort of like driven by an abstract notion of what does creativity mean, and bring that to whatever it is that you're building. So some of the common themes that I've heard from the people that you've talked about is like, what is in the DNA of their product? And I think, the idea of creativity in the DNA of product is much more interesting and much more sustainable, and something that's going to grow, as opposed to a rush to a financial transaction or something that, is there to immediately make money. And at the same time, that's in this tiny little market, relatively speaking, that is the music industry. So, there's a whole heap of different challenges when you look at like actually setting up a startup inside the music industry. And a lot of the common themes that I've heard on your podcast is it was, okay, a problem to be solved. People, addressed, I listened to the interview there with Surf. You know, like he had a problem to be solved, and BandLab. There's a that's transforming the way in which people think about creating music and so on. But it's still at the heart of it. It's like being driven by creativity. So yeah, it's an interesting moment. So to have someone like yourself who has that background and then also has an interest in startups, I think is super useful. Certainly wasn't there, you know, when we went and, you know, had a crack at setting up Disco.
I'll ask you a direct and interesting question, because when we started talking together 15 minutes ago, and we've been in email before, you mentioned that you listened to 5, 6, 7, 8 different episodes of the podcast, and your comment was that when you weren't around starting Disco, having the perspectives of starting a company where they're at least not very visible, accessible. Could you expand on your point of how it felt starting Disco that time ago? Was it just a wilderness? Like, how did you feel and how did you navigate it?
Yeah, it was almost, well, first of all, it was a problem that we needed to solve. So I'd lost my iTunes collection maybe like 2 or 3 times. Back then, what supervisors would do is manage most of their collections on iTunes and then be receiving box links or WeTransfer or whatever else, or being forced to go to major labels and forced to download from their websites. And iTunes was set up as a product that was essentially there as a consumer product, not a B2B product. And then I could see basically all of the busy time that was being lost by the team in uploading and downloading files. And then it's not about actually losing the songs themselves. You can go and find that data, but what you do lose is that IP that you've generated in your thoughts on responding to briefs and what does a playlist look like. So I went out and had a look to see, surely there must be a product that's been made for this service, and particularly with music supervisors in mind. And the reality was that the things that were there kind of just pissed me off. Like they were, they clearly didn't understand the workflow of what we needed.
Yeah.
They were insanely expensive. And it kind of outraged me so much. I was like, you know what? Let's just make something for ourselves. So, and it was really only like a couple of, you know, maybe like 18 months or so after that, maybe 2 years after that, that it was like, we've actually spent a lot of money on this. Maybe there's other people that would like to use it as well. So it was never entered into in the notion of, oh, I'd like to do a startup. You know, it was even after that I discovered like Y Combinator and this whole world that was, you know, probably very, very US centric, but and then really the sort of the podcasts and the books and the things that were there that then supported that really kind of informed on me on, okay, well, actually, I've created something that solves a problem for myself. That's actually really validates this. Because of our position in Australia in the marketplace, we could go and talk to rights holders and say, we'd really like you to upload into our Disco inbox. And maybe it's something that you could use as well. And then that idea of, hang on, here's a product that's been made for a whole heap of SMBs, sort of smaller businesses like ourselves. Maybe this is something that's going to be useful and empower the gatekeepers that are supervisors that are then generating and unlocking the value in copyrights. And up until then, no one had actually thought of them. Lots of people had said, hey, come and work over here, come and look at this marketplace. We want to ensure that we can take a clip on the way through. But no one had actually just created a tool that would be useful for them, per se.
Yeah.
So it was something for ourselves. It was then something that we felt could be used outside of level 2 when we first of all tried it with local partners, and then when we worked out that it was that the people liked it, then we could go and start, went to LA, and that's really where the engine room of the international sort of sync industry is. But again, a series, not really, let's go out and do a startup.
It's interesting. A lot of the conversations I'm having these days with my own team or with other founders is the concept of bootstrapping versus getting capital and scaling. This is not exactly what you're saying, but there's this interesting point about creating something out of your own need within your own system, spend a couple of years on it to then realize it has a potential for someone else without the intent of building some scalable product right away. And the time and experience that goes into creating that product might, speak to the success of it. I don't know, and this is something yet to be discovered, what the right approach is. Well, and obviously it's individual for every single person, but generally speaking, what is the right approach to building a product that serves something really well? We had Ames API that also works within the sync world here on, and they sort of have a similar-ish story to Disco of having this internal problem developing, and everything was natural, was cash flow positive from day one, just because they build a business within a sector they know so much about, care so much about, and know exactly how the solution is going to look and feel. There might be a point to that. I don't know. But that's how you did it. But did it at any point start to feel like a startup? Did you have that now I'm a founder kind of thing?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. One is that what we were doing was completely illogical. So how do you get 1,200 users around the world onto the one platform and, to there as a tool that is going to help them? It makes no sense. And because of, I guess, the position of level 2, we're able to bootstrap, up to we went out for our seed round at $1 million ARR, and there were already 19 people working on the business. Felt like a startup then, and but at that point, we'd made a whole heap of very illogical decisions that you really just couldn't explain, but it was because we intuitively understood the workflow of our users and also understood the importance of workflow. So if you can create something that is incredibly productive and empowering for your users, and then you find that the one shared problem that both the music supervisors and the rights holders have is actually managing and sharing music, then you've discovered an abstract notion that's very hard to explain until you've actually brought everyone together. But as soon as you do, makes sense, So, yeah, that was something that we really needed to explore. And there's one patent that is there that's attached to Disco, and that is about the breadcrumb trail, that idea of capturing capturing the IP choices, the creative IP choices that have been made previously by your team. And so the ability to be able to very quickly go through a catalog. Now it's obviously supported by AI and machine learning and all of the good stuff that we have also on the platform. But it's this sort of combination of creative choices that then define who you are as a creative, but also it's a blank canvas where you can work that you work in the way that you identify with. So it's Disco stands for Discovery, Intuitive Search, Creative Organization. It's meant to be, you can either be incredibly organized or incredibly disorganized. It's up for you to what it is that you do with it. And so that insight around, certainly with creatives, is you define yourself by the way in which you work. And once we'd kind of, I guess, seen the way in which people just love the platform, then we knew that it's kind of like A&R. It's that's my background as well. It's A&R where the most successful bands are the ones that actually the fans support and the fans actually talk about. And so if you can get your users championing your platform, then you know that you're in a good place. That sort of idea of customer success and customer service, and being the humble servant for all of the other people that you're there to serve. That goes back to the roots of Level 2 and being a music supervision agency and dealing with all of the sharp elbows and all of the stakeholders and all of the people that are involved in any process of supervising. All of that gets poured into the platform.
It's really interesting. I'm curious about one thing. It might be a weird question. When I talk to you, when I read your emails, even your looks being somewhat similar to Rick Rubin, it seems to be a calmness over you, it's very delightful. Was that also the journey, or was it the traditional startup stress? I need to understand, like, how you have a successful company. You develop a product for your own needs, discover might be users out there, and then you start a startup journey, raising capital. Like, did the intensity, the feeling change? Like, what happened in that space?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I don't know, like Level 2, when we set up that as a music supervision agency, we upset a lot of people, because this is really early on. This is when you either went to a major label and you paid them six figures for a track, or a sound house tried to make something that sounded like the thing you couldn't afford. And I spent a long time working with independent bands. I'd spent a long time on community radio. I had this, and essentially Level 2 was, first of all, a label that, after choosing not to go and work at, I had the chance to go and work at like a major heading up their A&R, and I was like, no, I'll do my own thing. Turns out that my taste of independent bands isn't necessarily the best basis for a business. So it was, but what I did, I was sharing space with a production company, and they were asking me for music, and then I still remember like the first, $1,500 placement that I had, and the first time that I put like a metal band in as a joke into an ad. And so that really, I guess, but then that introduced me to advertising, and you think music industry is challenging when you've got the pressure of not just the large budgets or not large budgets that might be attached to licensing, but also then the media buys that sit behind that, and the personalities every step of the way. That's a kind of pretty fiery furnace to be in, and you have that. Plus, then you're upsetting the majors, because early on, it's like, well, no, we can actually just go and use an independent artist, and we probably prefer to do it. Now, along the way, you discover allies and friends and people, and we have, a wonderful relationship with a number of the majors, but we really challenged a lot of people. So it was kind of born out of a failed record label, a really challenging time to then create music supervision in Australia, and we changed the way in which music supervision worked. And then to move from that into, actually, there's something that the next step up then is creating a product. And the challenges that are based around that. But every step of the way, it's kind of like you have one set of challenges, then you have the next set of challenges, and then you look down and you go, oh my God, we've traveled this far so far. It's kind of like strong convictions lightly held. You need to be able to absorb all of there is nothing more stressful than a bootstrap startup. Like that is, and it's the responsibility that you have. It's not about just the burn and everything else, but it's being that consciousness of, as you start bringing people into that bootstrap, you are a responsibility to them. You are a responsibility to everyone around them. And then when you take money, different founders are different ways, but for me personally, I then owe a responsibility to the people that I take money from. And so that stress, it's like you should be stressing as a music supervisor, you should be stressing about whether or not you have that approval. And so you start living with it, and then it becomes a little bit addictive, and then it becomes like the thing that's almost like this thing in your life. And so in a funny kind of way, all of those experiences then leads up to being not a bad run up to then sort of going and starting to build a B2B SaaS platform that sits at the intersection of music and tech.
So it almost didn't feel like a huge jump to some degree because you've been through the stress and the responsibilities and the pressures of delivery and
yes, and at the same time I'm pretty stubborn, and I'm also, and at that point as well, I think we're in some of our communication, we talked about that idea of being both an insider and an outsider of the music industry. And so by that point, there's a challenge in knowing the inside of the music industry, but there's also some observations that you can make if you're not working as a label manager or you're not working in A&R or so on. And there's also observations that I'd had that I could make not working in an advertising agency, but being a bridge between the two. So in a way, if you're building a product that takes some of the rigor and some of the, the core metrics and the learnings about what does it mean to cross the chasm? What does it mean about a low churn rate? What does it mean around, some of those key metrics that are really important that are based around a SaaS product? If you can connect that and you can sit sort of inside the music industry and outside it, then you're in a really interesting place, I think. And you kind of need all of those things to be able to deal with the stress and the challenge that comes next.
Is that where you are still?
Every day.
So my presumption, reading you as a calm man, is that true on the outside, inside? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I think it's a good question. I'm loving the fact that we're going philosophical, and it's again.
You almost requested it. You almost requested it.
I was kind of hoping this would become like a therapy session, which is great. I think. I don't know. I think that there needs you need to have a fierceness and a rigor around the business that you're building, and you also I don't know, like you don't want people to take food off your table. You've got to be there. There is a competitiveness here, and there is something that. We were lucky, I guess, in a way that we've spent, 8 years building a moat, building out a thesis, building out a philosophy. The rigor, you cannot for a moment stop being paranoid, being observant, and it's this really important thing of being able to focus on the granular, then be able to look at the big picture, and that's really that can be very draining, and it also then just becomes, I think it was Seth Godin that just said, it's not about a work-life balance. There's just life, and so it's your choices. What do you do with that? Do you get an email daily? Do you get something from Stoic daily just to be able to remind yourself of what do you use as your foundations on to be able to absorb that stress that is there every day? And if it's not there, then you should be really worried about it. I looked at there's other examples of startups here in Australia. So like I know the guys at Linktree, for example. Now they're making amazing money from day one. Everyone is on their own particular journey, and at some point stress is going to kind of come in, and it should be something that you wrap your arms around, really.
Mm. Yeah, for me, stress levels personally are always really high. Um, and that is the world we operate in. And for me, it's been about how to, first of all, keep it at bay so it doesn't overload, but then also accepting it or loving it to some degree. Like it's the constant struggle that you need to get used to. But you talk about fierceness. You talk about having that fierceness. What is the source of consistent fierceness for you the last 22 years? You said that you've been on this founder's journey with first Level 2 music and then disco. What is the source?
The source of that fierceness, I think it comes down to making conscious choices about, not making conscious choices about setting up your own business, and then the buck stops with you, and that never goes away. And at the same time, you can have incredible flow. You can have incredible moments that you can bring people with you, and you can build things, and so there's an outsized return on that. But I also think that as once you've decided that no, you're not going to go and work at a larger company, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In actual fact, often that experience can help inform on joining a startup at a different stage. But I think that if you start up your own small business, then you need to make sure that the lights are on. You need to know your P&L as like this living, breathing entity, and you need to be able to instinctively talk to the health of the company that you're running. And so that, and if you're not being fierce about that, then eventually someone else will come and step into that space.
What I thought really interesting about that answer is how I interpreted it. It comes from an intellectual place of making conscious choices and then protecting those conscious choices. The way that I experience fierceness myself is sort of the opposite. It's in the way that I can't help it, and then I need to rationalize why is it like this. And it's two interesting ways of coming about it. But do you feel like it comes from like your intellectual conscious choices first, and then your response to that?
I wish I could say that there were intellectual conscious choices, but it was. I think it's more about it's also about being in the moment, right? Like if you've got the luxury of being in the moment, and working in the moment and being absorbed by the moment, then you actually almost have to force yourself to kind of like step back and go, am I taking an intellectual conscious choice here? Yeah. So yeah, I think the fierceness just comes out of, I think once you have a sense of something that needs to be done, you can't do anything but do it, Yeah. And that's, and I don't know, and maybe passion's the word, I'm not sure, but it's also something where it's completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense at all, but you just end up that you I guess, and also then it's also about what is it that drives you? Are you someone that likes to either help others, or are you there? My background really was working with independent artists, and so with music supervision, what drove me was it was sort of like this extreme sport of A&R, of being able to put bands that should have been discovered, be able to turn up and knock on their door and say, well, actually, I've got enough money for you, from TV commercial to record a new album, or go on the road, or build a studio, or do whatever. We're talking dollars, not pennies. And once you get a little taste of that, that then becomes like a driver, an important, part of your life. And so yeah, it's an emotional thing as well. and you miss it if it's not there.
Is that the base, the embetterment of the living conditions of artists? Or was that like, what is the base? Because, starting a record label, going from major system, A&R into that, that must have been it. Is it still that?
Is that what still drives me?
Yeah, the livelihood of artists, or like, have you changed sort of the base?
Look, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we've just, we have an artist product now for disco where, someone can pay $12 a month and, have themselves and a manager or partner and unlimited songs and be using the same software platform that's used as the front line to manage a major rights holder. And but it also then it empowers, it means that the best song wins as well. Like, that's the interesting thing with supervision, is the best song wins. It's not about necessarily the profile of the artist, or it's about that process of sourcing it, of almost what is the character, what is the extra person or the personality that's going to be in this picture, and what is the song that walks into that space, and what is the role that they play. Now, if that can be a song that comes from an independent artist, then basically allows them to continue to create their art, or it can be a vintage track, and this has happened with placements that we've had, where up until the time that we've done that placement, that artist has had no commercial success. There's been ones where, like, they've passed away, and we come to their family or their estate and say, actually, we have this for you. And that's almost like the first time that their music and their art is recognized. Someone might have put it out on a private press, but there's been nothing beyond that has sort of signified in a commercial sense the importance of the art they've created. Now, if you can, for me, both the process of A&R and the process of identifying music, but then also the opportunity to democratize discovery and to be able to, through synchronization is one way, but, there's a whole heap of different ways that I think discovery and democratization is going to work. But all of those things add up to, I think, a really important things for empowering artists. And that still sits very much at the core of both disco, and is also really important part of the origin story of where disco came from.
You as a founder have been through a relatively long journey of two different companies, and disco is even more relevant now than it's ever been. What is the future for you as a founder? Is it just continuing at this pace? Like, what's your outlook?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. I saw or listened to you talk about defining yourself as someone that's interested in early stage startups, or, like pre-seed and seed, and that idea of, being engaged in one idea and then needing to move on and pick up the next. And I think the thing that I would, and it resonated with me, like I understand that, but I think the interesting thing is that once you get on a path and you start building something, it actually opens up that there's, every step of the way is like this new little startup that sort of sits inside the business. And then the business that you are growing and the people around you help define the business. It's this really, again, I'm listening to the Surf podcast there. I think that idea of being a servant to the business, or a servant to the idea of it, is something that never really has an end. You can continue to work for the company, and that's and so that kind of, every day is different, every next quarter is different, every year is different. I literally had to, I think prior to this podcast, I had to go back and just remind myself about what I wrote in 2016 around disco, just to make sure that it was actually an interesting exercise, and the tenets there of the job to be done, the people that we're helping, the themes that underpin the idea of being a platform on which the music industry work. Those tenets are still there, but now it's the interesting idea of going, well, how do you connect workflow with AI? Where does that go? And so it's not just about the fact that it's like, Disco's 55 people, and now we have 100 million files on the platform, and literally not only do most of the music supervisors around the world use it, but most of the rights holders do. And then it's not just that, but it's like A&R and radio pluggers and managers. And so every one of those then becomes like a cohort which you need to think about and go, well, how are we going to make their lives more successful? And that's that sort of satisfies that thing of it's almost like every one of those is an interesting question about and is its own little startup in its own right.
One concept that I've struggled with or thought a lot about lately is the longevity aspect of being a founder. And I'll just elaborate a bit on my point. I get to speak with, on the podcast, off the podcast, a lot of amazing people. And I'm trying to dissect what is it that is a common denominator what are different common denominators in successful founder stories. And one of them that has slowly shown itself, I haven't made like a final conclusion on it, is a longevity mindset. Funnily enough, that's super conflicting with how I do stuff. And I've tried to align that because, as you said, I'm an early stage guy, and I think it's been very much due to relatively severely suffering from ADHD, and I've never known anything different. But what I'm slowly realizing is, okay, well, it's a thought I've had. Is the possibility of working the way that I do with, different aspects of different startups and being present, but the sum of that being the longevity. My point is, that's also what I'm seeing in your mindset, is the longevity aspect, and the stimuli you need comes from the operations and nuances and experimentations within that longevity mindset. Am I on the right path on like your own perception of this, or?
I think you are. Like, I think with, I think having it, ADHD is actually probably a perfect condition for applying yourself to the numerous things that come at you every day. And I think in a way there's a rigor around that it's either you're up for it or you're not, and that's fine either way. It's either, do you find that pressure something that feeds you, or do you find it something that is too much of a challenge? And what happens if that pressure goes away? Are you bored? That's and so I think that's only something that you will find out that you will know as you go along. And it's similar to, are you making a company or are you just making a feature? If you're just making a feature or you're just making a function, you're not really you are technically making a company, but essentially that is going to have an end. It's either going to have an end through an acquisition, or it's going to have an end through it's no longer relevant or useful. And so the more that's where a lot of music tech companies end up, and there's absolutely no shame in that at all. That's a wonderful thing to go through. That could be a 3-year journey. That isn't necessarily around longevity. However, if you find the thing that brings you to life and the thing that you really feel passionate about, then it doesn't matter that the idea that you thought was going to take 3 years actually takes 10 years. And when you're 10 years in and you look back and you go, well, or you look up for the first time and go, geez, it's been 10 years. Then it doesn't feel like 10 years. And really, and at that point, all of the different things that might feed you have taken on a different form. And you're still passionate and you have purpose with what you do. And I think it's finding a pathway to that's really important.
One of the things that I speak to my consultancy clients about is, one of the disclaimers I make is that I prefer to ask questions rather than give answers, because the question is the constant. The answer is ever-changing. And I think that speaks to founding a company. But what is your question? What is your problem? What is the thing that you're curious to solve? Like, how do you solve this problem for music supervisors? How do you address this? And the answer can be ever-changing according to the market, technological innovation, global policies. There's so many things that can affect the answer. But the question, if you have a right question, a good question, a constant question, then that can be your base. That can be your anchor. Now I'm taking this far, but like, what is your question in Disco? What is the thing that you wanted to solve? Like, is that in a way that you work, or is it me just bullshitting right now?
No, I think the question is important. I think it's about, for me anyway, it's about understanding workflow. And so why do you work that way? How do you work that way? What does that say about you? How can we support and understand you? I mean, the thing with Disco is that we have this insane net promoter score, which is like in the early 80s, which is like a very high number after 10 years for a product that's at the pointy end of, like commercial transactions. But the thing that the feedback that we have is that amazing product, amazing support. So we've invested really heavily in literally 24/7 support on a platform that, for users that previously, if you're sending a Dropbox link or Box link, there's no one there to talk to. Yeah. But so we're actually online, always asking why, and always asking how, and how can we help? And the thousands of tickets that we deal with then have like a average answering time of under 2 minutes.
Wow.
Not from a bot, but from a human.
What?
But there are people online right now that, and they're people that love music and are heavily invested in music. So you're absolutely right. Like, the why and the how is something that is ingrained in the business. Yeah. And so that's, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think
it does.
Right. Yeah,
it does. It does. It was almost also a leading question. So sorry about that.
No, that's. It was good for you to kind of bring it back. I mean, I am enjoying the philosophical rabbit holes that we're going down.
Yep. What is the future of Disco? What's going to happen with the product?
Yeah, look, I think we're nearly at the starting line. So
what?
We're nearly at the starting line, dude. We've spent 10 years getting a majority of the music industry onto the one platform, but most people don't. If you're outside of the music industry, most people don't know that we exist, and we're in this increasingly noisy space where there's sort of startups that, and I understand why they need to make noise because they're trying to, exist and survive and everything else. But we have so much now that we have a place where there are people that are working, we can now start to connect them, and we can now start to we can start solving the human problems around metadata, because everyone rushes off to, this is different ways of solving the problem around metadata. It's actually a human problem. It's not a data problem. So what are the drivers that can help solve human problems? Well, communication can, and commercial outcomes can. And then if you can find ways of establishing a network effects platform that happens to be at an intersection where people work, then there's some really interesting opportunities there. And if those opportunities drive success for the users, you actually start going some way to redefining and expanding the way that the music industry works and how it values copyrights. And then at the same time, there's all of these tailwinds of BandLab and their 60 million users, or there's all of these different things that so far don't necessarily touch or bump into disco yet, but the places where we start to the overlap between our platform and then other momentum and other things that are happening in the music industry makes for a really exciting time for us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to say exciting time and B2B SaaS platform all in the same sentence. It's like, is that actually possible? Well, yeah, actually it is.
I love that answer, and it speaks to my point of longevity mindset. I've loved this, Karl. There's a lot of founders right now in the music industry that's trying to make their mark. You talked about noise, creating noise. There was a small, I don't know if that was a criticism, but there's definitely a comment to different ways of engaging with the people around you. The question I'm coming to is, what do you believe that founders need to know? What is it, some things that you've learned that maybe is almost uniquely positioned in your experience that could be worth sharing?
Yeah, I think things that founders need to know. I think that people need to take an abstract idea and then actually be very pragmatic about the reality of the music industry and what it is that they're trying to do. The music industry is infuriatingly, bound to old ways and stakeholders and people that don't want to have change. And so someone comes in with a great idea, you actually need to, I think, really live and breathe the problem. And then you also need to know that you're not entitled to solve that problem. You actually need to go and do the hard work yourself to be able to not actually have to go out necessarily and look for funding. You should actually try and work towards actually creating something that is compelling and useful and helpful. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that your idea isn't a good one, and it doesn't mean that it isn't necessarily going to come to life at some point. But there is a massive responsibility to go beyond just a good idea. And so then it's like, well, where do you get those learnings from? For me personally, it was about, how to the Y Combinator series, how to start a startup, and those 10 lectures that is amazing. Sort of, that information's out there. It's about actually diving in and looking at the things that all of the books, all of the podcasts, all of the things that actually are around your idea that might be able to help you. And that is something that I don't necessarily, I think that people either get very blinkered and just sort of and have an expectation that they're just going to solve their problem, or they're not necessarily rigorous enough around creating a business that can support the time that's needed to bring that idea to life.
Yeah. So I hear a lot of things in what you say. You talk about being pragmatic. You talk about, to some degree, due diligence by knowing the problem and working through them, bringing worth. So the opposite of that, in my interpretation, is someone trying to build something fast to solve a problem they maybe don't know in depth.
Yep. And you know, I have thoughts and feelings around, I think it's also really dangerous when there's a little bit of knowledge and not necessarily, that much time spent at the coalface. And I think that there's examples out there, and there's been recent examples, but I think that you can, I think, rush too quickly to try and build something at scale, as opposed to actually validate that it's going to resonate at the really granular level. And that's the hard, boring bit. That's the hard, boring bit. And people don't necessarily work at like the core of their idea. And I think that it gets very dangerous when there's people that have a passing understanding of an aspect of the music industry, and then they start communicating that to investors or people that maybe are outside the music industry or just attracted to the idea of the music industry. And that's when, that creates, I think, or will create sort of some really challenging moments, and might actually make it harder for valid, startups that work inside the music industry.
That's a really interesting point, because there's a lot of reluctance from non-domain experts within the music industry, investors, to go into music startups. A lot of it has to do with, especially if they're very established, they've seen a lot of decks. And when things consistently doesn't add up, or there's too little visible examples of successful investments, it all turns even more sour and negative. Even though you love the bootstrap method, there's also a lot of validity to having healthy influx of capital, the same way that you had a seed round. At one point, when you've actually created something healthy, have validation for the correctness of your assumptions, then still needs to come capital in. Karl, I think this was lovely. It's so great meeting you in person. Our initial connection came through Ole Dreyer, who is a common friend to you, friend and mentor to me. And one of the really important things that you said in the first email we sent together is the importance of mentors and mentees. And your contribution to this podcast speaks to that. So hopefully people will learn. And I'm looking forward to, over the next many years, develop a closer relationship with you. And it feels extra special when you come through Ole. I've said it jokingly on the podcast, and I've said it to him many times, that I have one mission, and that is to somehow make him rich one day. I still haven't figured it out, but that's how I see it. Like the importance of that is so, so important. Well, thank you for taking your time.
No, likewise, Jacob. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's kudos to you. I think that what you're doing here is really important. I like the fact that there's listening that's happening and questions that are being asked that hopefully are useful to people out there. And I think that you're going about creating something that's going to be really powerful and useful. And, you talk about the democratization and support of artists. Well, I think this is really, you're in that exercise of the democratization of knowledge. And I love it. It's great. And likewise, want to continue to stay connected, and we'll be watching with keen interest, listening with keen interest as the podcast develops.
Thank you, Karl.
Thanks, man. Cheers.